The atmosphere in the studio was like any other night. Lights humming, cameras rolling, and the audience clapping on cue as host Miles Rourke, infamous for his sharp tongue and smug style, welcomed his next guest, world-renowned actor and civil rights advocate Marcus Kane, who had just released a book on leadership, integrity, and the cost of truth in modern times. And though the segment was pitched as a discussion of the book, insiders already knew Rourke had planned to go off script. His ratings had dipped and he was hunting for a viral moment, a clash to reignite his cultural relevance. Marcus entered to thunderous applause, every step measured, his presence exuding quiet strength and deep intellect. And after some casual chatter about the book's release, Rourke's tone shifted, his questions sharpening as he accused Kane of being out of touch, of lecturing from a pedestal, of turning his success into a pulpit to shame others. And as the audience chuckled nervously, Marcus smiled calmly, letting the insults hang in the air without reacting, like a man who had seen storms before and no longer feared the rain. Then Rourke leaned forward, voice louder, saying, "You preach unity, but isn't it true you've only ever succeeded because Hollywood needed someone, like you, a safe face, a token?" And the studio gasped, the air turning heavy with disbelief as the crew hesitated, unsure whether to cut or ride the moment. But Marcus remained still, his silence more cutting than any words, before finally responding with a voice that filled the room, not with anger but with steel resolve. "I didn't ask to be given anything. I earned it, every role, every stage, every platform, and if my presence makes you uncomfortable, maybe it's not because of what I represent, but because it reminds you of everything you've pretended to be." The audience erupted, a few stood up, others clapped with disbelief as Rourke leaned back, visibly stunned, his usual smirk faltering. But Marcus wasn't done. He leaned in now, his tone calm yet thunderous. "You invite people here not to understand them but to mock them. You dress it up as dialogue, but what you want is a spectacle, and what you fear, deep down, is that someone might actually speak truth, and do it without raising their voice." And suddenly, the entire rhythm of the show broke. The control Rourke usually held over his interviews slipped through his fingers, and Marcus continued, unraveling the host's tactics with surgical precision, calling out the performative nature of these platforms, the comfort of provocation without consequence, and how real dialogue had been replaced by sound bites engineered to stir the algorithm, not the soul. Rourke tried to pivot, asking if Marcus was against freedom of speech, but the actor laughed lightly and said, "Freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom from consequence. You're free to say what you want. I'm free to let the truth speak louder than your script." The control room debated cutting to commercial, but the audience was locked in, riveted by the unscripted unraveling of a man so used to having the upper hand. And as Marcus went on, he spoke not just for himself, but for all those who had been reduced to roles, dismissed by talking heads, or invited into spaces where they were only ever meant to validate someone else's ego. The moment had ceased to be an interview. It became a reckoning, a live confrontation between two very different kinds of power, one built on platform, the other on principle. When the segment ended, there was no wrap-up joke, no handshake. Marcus simply stood, thanked the audience, and walked out with a dignity that made silence thunderous, while Rourke sat at his desk, blinking, fingers tapping, unsure whether he had just lost control of the show or been shown what control actually looks like. Within hours, the clip was everywhere, millions of views pouring in from Twitter, YouTube, and news outlets hungry for the moment's clarity, and hashtags like Jock Kane Speaks Truth, Rourke Reckoning, and Live TV Awakening dominated the feed. But Marcus said nothing online, no follow-up, no posts, just returned to his work quietly, letting the truth live where it belonged, in the minds of those who witnessed it, raw and unpolished, like a mirror none could turn away from. In the weeks that followed, Rourke tried to laugh it off, calling it a good show, but the public knew better. What they'd seen was a moment that shattered illusion, a reminder that performance can't withstand presence, that some voices don't need to shout to be heard, and that in an age obsessed with winning arguments, sometimes the most radical act is to speak the truth, walk away, and leave the room forever changed. The days that followed Marcus Kane's powerful walk-off were a whirlwind of noise and silence crashing into each other. The media couldn't stop replaying the clip. Pundits dissected every word, body language. Experts were booked on every morning show to explain what Rourke's flinch meant, what Marcus's tone revealed, and whether the exchange marked a new chapter in celebrity interviews or simply an overdue correction in a broken format. And yet, through all the clamor, Marcus himself remained offline, issuing no follow-up, no comment, no podcast appearance, which only deepened the mystique around his decision to confront and walk, giving the moment an almost mythic weight, while Rourke's team scrambled behind the scenes to restore the host's shattered authority, scheduling fluff interviews and staging laughter-heavy segments in hopes that audiences would forget. But it was too late. The internet never forgets. Fans and critics alike noticed that Marcus's silence was louder than any PR campaign. Bookstores reported a massive spike in sales for his book, Unscripted Integrity, and within 2 weeks it had climbed to #1 on every bestseller list, not because it was promoted, but because people wanted to hear more from the man who had dared to speak clearly in a culture addicted to confusion. Meanwhile, Rourke's staff, internally rattled, started leaking stories of a man unraveling behind the scenes. He was reportedly rewatching the Kane clip obsessively, blaming producers for not cutting to commercial, questioning whether his entire format had become obsolete in a world that now craved sincerity over spectacle, and though publicly he laughed it off, saying in a tweet, "Well, Marcus Kane came with fire. Respect." Insiders knew it was a hollow gesture. His ego bruised, his image reshaped by a man who didn't raise his voice or insult him, but simply held up a mirror and refused to let him look away. A new wave of guests began to decline Rourke's invites, citing discomfort or timing conflicts, while Kane, meanwhile, was being invited everywhere, from late-night shows and university forums to civil rights panels and leadership summits. But he declined most offers, choosing instead to sit down for one long-form conversation with a young unknown podcaster from Detroit named Aria Wells, who had built a